Good morning. I'm Tracy Jones, Head of Press, PR and Public Affairs at the National Gallery. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our online Artemisia press conference, and I'm very sorry we've not been able to provide coffee and pastries for you this morning. During our event today, you'll have a first chance to see our Artemisia exhibition as we join curator Letizia Treves for a tour through the show in the Sainsbury wing. We'll be hearing from our sponsor, Intesa Sanpaolo. There'll be a demonstration of the Google Arts and Culture online retrospective of Artemisia Gentileschi, including a chance to explore up close the painted ceiling at Marlborough House in London, which she worked on alongside her father. We'll have a world premiere of FKA Twigs on Artemisia Gentileschi, and of course there'll be plenty of time for you to ask your questions. However, before I hand over to our director, Dr. Gabriele Finaldi, a few bits of housekeeping. Throughout the event, please do ask any questions you might have, and you can do this by clicking on the link and the text immediately below the screen. We will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible, but if we do run out of time, you can also email the press office with any additional questions, and we'll display our address on screen at the end of the event. Now, without further ado, let me hand you over to the Director of the National Gallery, Gabriele Finaldi.
Hello, good morning and welcome to the National Gallery and welcome to this presentation of the Artemisia exhibition. The National Gallery acquired in 2018 the self-portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi as St. Catherine. It's the first painting by the great 17th century painter to enter a public collection in this country. And it's the acquisition of that picture that really inspired us to prepare this exhibition. It's the first exhibition on Artemisia that's ever taken place in Britain, and many of the works that you will see in the show have never actually been seen in Britain before. Artemisia was really a remarkable character. She wasn't the only woman painter of the 17th century, but she acquired extraordinary international success. She worked for the King of England. She was briefly in London at the end of the 1630s. She worked for the King of Spain, the Viceroys of Naples, for connoisseurs in different cities in Italy, and she was enormously admired. She was a sort of phenomenon in her time. I suppose for us at the beginning of the 21st century, Artemisia comes across as a very powerful and inspirational figure. Somebody who, in a world of 17th century art, which was dominated by men patrons and men artists, Artemisia found a way to have her own voice heard, to have success, an autonomous success of her own. And she achieved that through extraordinary talent, extraordinary invention, but also, of course, through very clever connections with patrons and with supporters. The exhibition is the work, of course, of many people, but we're particularly grateful to our curator, Letizia Treves, whom you'll hear from in a moment. Any exhibition of this kind requires the support of many people, in particular the lenders, both institutional and private, who are prepared to part with their works for a short while. In the exhibition, you'll see it's a remarkable group of paintings, but also some extraordinary documents, some recently discovered letters written by Artemisia, and very remarkably, and for the first time ever on display, the transcript of the trial document from the Archivio di Stato in Rome. Any exhibition of this kind also requires people to help us, to support us, to realize it, and we have several supporters who have been with us in this case, but particularly I want to thank the sponsors of the exhibition, Intesa Sanpaolo, the team in Turin, Michele Coppola in particular, but I'd like to introduce you now to Alberto Mancuso, General Manager of Intesa Sanpaolo in the London hub. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriele. It's really a pleasure to be back to see you, whatever is a virtual way. This is the new normal. So very happy to take part today to this press release. I'm delighted to be here and to, on behalf of Intesa Sanpaolo, Michele Coppola, as you were mentioning. For us, it's very important because, as you know, Intesa Sanpaolo is more popular as one of the most important lending and financial bank, the most important in Italy, one of the most important in Euro area. But for sure, I think all of you knows how much important is our investment and presence for culture, social framework in Italy internationally. In Intesa Sanpaolo, we strongly believe that it is a role that we have to act, and witness of this are the crucial role of our shareholders. Some of them are charitable historical foundation in Italy and still remain very important shareholders, as I said. How our concrete initiative sustain the artistic effort, it's one of the major important initiatives, Progetto Cultura. That is one, let's say, of most important initiative that we take part within our strategic business plan. Progetto Cultura involve the exhibition of all our artistic patrimony of the bank through three important museums in Galleria d'Italia in Milan, Naples, and Vicenza. And very soon, a new, let's say, new mate will be in Turin, more dedicated on the photography side. I can say that very important, I would say even more in the framework of pandemic, the role of the bank to support, now it's almost 30 years, to support to maintain this historical heritage of Italian culture, Italian artistic patrimony. Over the last 30 years, we support more than 1,500 works in museum, church, and archaeology for their maintenance. I think the relation through Intesa Sanpaolo and National Gallery is one of the most important archetypes of our effort international, as I said. But I want also to highlight that in this pandemic effort, Intesa is been supporting a lot also organization through loans up to 25 million euros in Italy for all these initiatives. As I said, Progetto Cultura is becoming really crucial for us in the last recent years, and the partnership with the National Gallery started in 2016. We have this important exhibition we sponsored that was Minus Adoration, and then continued to grow. Last initiative together was in 2019 with Gabriele as a consultant curator for exhibition in Naples in Gallerie d'Italia for the exhibition Rubens Van Dyck Ribera a Princely collection. More to come, I know, in 2022. There will be also the presence of a National Gallery in Italy for the Artemisia exhibition. But what I want today to remark the new chapter that we are here to celebrate today. The partnership with National Gallery, as was mentioned before, starts with the exhibition of finally back after the first start in February for the original date. I'm very glad that National Gallery can support us, can put us in a condition to challenge this very tough framework and to start again, to start really the exhibition of Artemisia Gentileschi. We will support with all our effort and all our presence since the opening in the next days. Will be very important to see some important contribution of Artemisia Gentileschi, but for sure the curator of the exhibition, Letizia Treves, will be more in detail than I can, but I think that will be important for everybody appreciate all the pictorial language of Artemisia Gentileschi is dramatic, rare expressiveness for one of the most important 17th century Italian artists. We are pleased that we can really go back to this normal, and I don't want to go further, and please, I want to leave the stage to the curator of this exhibition, Letizia Treves. Thanks.
One of the highlights of any National Gallery press view is a chance to take a tour of the exhibition with its curator. However, due to the current circumstances, we're not able to have you all in the Sainsbury Wing with us at the same time to experience this, but we did not want you to miss out on this high point. So I'm now going to hand over to Letizia Treves, National Gallery's Sassoon curator of later Italian paintings, who's going to give us her tour of Artemisia.
In her lifetime, Artemisia Gentileschi was the most celebrated female painter in Europe. Forgotten for centuries, she is essentially a rediscovery of the 20th century. And with the growing interest in her work, there's been a tendency to look at certain elements of her biography, in particular her rape as a young woman. And these have sometimes obscured discussions about her art. And what I wanted to do here in this exhibition, the very first dedicated to Artemisia in this country, was to look at Artemisia more fully in the round, as a woman as well as an artist. Of course, her pictures are absolutely at the forefront of this exhibition, and there really is a spotlight on her. I want to show, in Artemisia's own words, what a woman can do. The postponement of this exhibition has required Herculean efforts on the part of the staff at the National Gallery and, of course, our lenders, who have really gone above and beyond to make sure that their objects could come to the exhibition. And Artemisia finally gets her spot in the spotlight. So the exhibition begins here in Rome, where Artemisia was born in 1593. She was the eldest child and only daughter of the painter Orazio Gentileschi. And growing up really was not easy for Artemisia. Her mother died when she was 12. She grew up in a male-dominated household, and looking after her three younger brothers effectively fell on the young Artemisia. But she clearly had talent, and her father Orazio trained her alongside her brothers in the art of painting. But her training was quite different from that of her brothers. Because Artemisia was a young, unmarried woman, she could not roam freely through the streets of Rome, copying the artworks on display like her brothers did. She was shut away at home, and we know this. Later on, she said that this was very noxious for her. But yet she clearly showed considerable talent, and we know she was painting independently by the time she was 16. This picture, her very first known signed and dated work, was painted when she was just 17. And looking at it, you can see what a sophisticated and mature picture it is for a teenager. She's already assimilated her father's technique. It's incredibly skilled. But what she brings to this very well-known Old Testament subject of Susanna is already something a little bit different. She brings a sort of truthfulness and a female perspective to the story. And I think here she really focuses on the plight of this vulnerable woman. And of course, Artemisia herself was in a vulnerable position. And just a few months after this picture was painted, she was famously raped by the painter Agostino Tassi in her father's house. Now, she entered into a relationship with Tassi for several months in the false hope that he would marry her. And when it became clear that Tassi would not go through with that, Orazio pressed charges for him having deflowered his daughter, effectively having taken away her virginity without her consent. And all the details of this trial exist in this incredible volume behind me. This is a transcript of the rape trial. It still exists. It's in the Archivio di Stato in Rome and is being shown in this exhibition for the very first time. We have it open at a page where Artemisia is brought to Tassi in the Tor di Nonna prison in Rome, and she is put under judicial torture. It was a way of verifying that her earlier statement was true. And in this, you get a sense of Artemisia's composure, her dignity, her poise as she answers the judge's questions. But you also get a sense of her spirit as she looks at Tassi during the torture, and she says, you know, this is the ring that you promised me. You know, these are your promises, as if referring to the promise of marriage. So you already get a sense of Artemisia's personality already in such a sort of difficult situation in which she found herself. The trial went on for several months, and we know that Artemisia must have continued painting for some time. Not many pictures exist from this early point of her career. But in November 1612, Tassi was found guilty. He was given a choice of banishment from Rome or 5 years hard labor. He chose banishment. This was never enforced. And Artemisia, the day after the verdict, is married off to Pier Antonio Stiattesi, who was the younger brother of the notary who'd helped Orazio with his legal defense. And with him, she moves to Florence, and the exciting new chapter of her life begins. So moving to Florence, Artemisia gains personal freedom. She's now a married woman. And also it marks a real professional development as she moves out of her father's shadow. She learns how to read and write. She, of course, hadn't been educated in Rome. And she joins the Artists' Academy, the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno, in 1616. She is the first woman to gain membership to the Academy in its 50-year history. And this opened many doors for her. She was able finally to meet contemporary artists, something she'd not had a chance to do in Rome. And she mixed in intellectual circles and befriended other cultural figures in Florence. And of course, she sought the patronage of the ruling family, the Medici, in Florence. And it's in the city that she paints some of her most famous works. And here I'm standing before one of the great highlights of this exhibition, which is bringing together the two versions of this very iconic composition of Judith beheading Holofernes. And this picture here, the second version, was almost certainly painted for the Grand Duke Cosimo II as a sort of showpiece. And what you can see is Artemisia treating a familiar subject. It's the Old Testament subject of Judith beheading Holofernes, and yet she brings something so different to this. Once again, she imagines what it's like. She gets under the skin of her protagonist and really imagines what this scene would be. And it's the brute strength required of Judith to actually behead Holofernes that she focuses on. It's the physical struggle in this picture, and she spares us none of the gore as the blood streams down the bed and spurts onto her bodice. It is extraordinary, and it's a very sort of realistic and truthful and unflinching account of the story. And she signs it very boldly in the corner, Ego Artemisia Lomi fecit. I, Artemisia Lomi, did this. And Lomi is the name that she used in Florence. It's the name of her paternal grandfather. Her family were originally from Pisa. And the reason she uses it in Florence is really so that her fellow Florentines might think of her as a compatriot. It's a very clever marketing strategy. And something else she does while she's in Florence is she uses her own face, and she puts herself into her pictures. So there are a number of self-portraits from her time in Florence where she assumes different roles, takes on different guises. And we don't know whether this was Artemisia's choice or whether patrons insisted on it, but there might have been practical reasons for doing it. It was certainly cheaper and a lot easier just to look in a mirror and paint yourself. Artemisia later in life complains about the cost of hiring models to pose for her. But of course, it's also a very clever marketing strategy. She puts herself into her paintings, and this helps spread her celebrity. Of course, this is something that Rembrandt did also in the Netherlands. But life in Florence was not without its challenges. She had 5 children in 5 years, and only 2 of those survived infancy. And hers was not a happy marriage. Her husband, Pier Antonio Stiattesi, ran up debts, and she was in constant financial difficulty. And she met a nobleman in Florence who was in the service of the Frescobaldi, Francesco Maria Maringhi, with whom she embarked on a very passionate affair. And this affair we know about through a series of letters, which we'll come to in a moment. But we can only imagine the physical and financial strain that Artemisia felt in Florence. She was essentially the breadwinner of the family. And it's with these debts running high that she left Florence and returned to Rome in 1620. In the 7 years since Artemisia had left Rome, she had transformed herself into an artist of considerable success. And now in Rome, not only did patrons want paintings by her hand, but they also commissioned portraits of her. She became the subject of other artists' work. And part of this celebrity was due to the fact that she was a successful female painter in the city. Now, Orazio left Rome soon after Artemisia arrived, and we know that she separated from her husband from about 1623. So Artemisia was effectively on her own. But we know that she continued in her passionate affair with Maringhi, and it is from these years, from her arrival in Rome, that an extraordinary group of letters documenting their relationship exist. These are in the Archivio Storico Frescobaldi. They were just discovered in 2011, and they're being shown in this exhibition abroad for the very first time. And the reason I wanted to borrow some of these letters was because you get a real sense of Artemisia's personality in them. And we have to remember she didn't know how to read and write previously, so she's taught herself to write, and her letters are full of grammatical errors and phonetic spellings, but this only sort of enhances this very strong personality you get coming through her letters. These are very intimate. It's a very intimate correspondence. Of course, no one else other than Maringhi was meant to read them. So she talks with equal fervour about the loss of her belongings, her desire to see her lover, her distant lover. There's one letter here that she writes following the death of her little boy, and she says she's dying with grief. So you get a sense of her vulnerability, her humour, and her passion. I mean, this is an incredibly erotic letter where she asks Maringhi not to masturbate in front of her painting. And I really wanted this more personal side of Artemisia to come out. And of course, the 1620s is really considered the best decade of her career. And she carried on painting for noblemen. One letter by Artemisia's husbands talks of these cardinals and princes in her house, not allowing her even time to eat. We don't know really who Artemisia mixed with in Rome. It seems that she was friends with some of the international community that were in Rome. And she shows herself to be incredibly adaptable. The style of her paintings really changes again. When she comes back to Rome, it's the height of fashion to collect Caravagesque paintings. So her pictures here have this kind of heightened naturalism, and she goes back to the kind of very dramatic, forceful lighting of Caravaggio. So she's responding very much and adapting to the tastes of patrons in Rome. This is one of the great highlights of the exhibition as well. It was restored in the Detroit Institute of Arts, especially for the exhibition. And it was one of the pictures that was a highlight in the 1976 Women Artists exhibition that really sort of brought Artemisia to a kind of international public for the very first time. She continues to paint scenes with female protagonists taken from the Bible and ancient history. And of course, these subjects were basically chosen by her patrons. But what Artemisia brought to these subjects was this very feminine sensibility. She managed to kind of get under the skin of her protagonists. And so her representations of the Magdalene or Lucretia really were very, very different from what her contemporaries painted. And I think patrons and collectors really knew that Artemisia could do something that male artists just couldn't provide. And this was really her unique selling point, and she was well aware of it. And in this room, this is another highlight, a newly discovered painting of Mary Magdalene in ecstasy, which only came to light in 2014. After a short trip to Venice in the late 1620s, Artemisia settles in Naples. She probably left Venice because of the plague that was then ravaging northern Italy. And by the summer of 1630, she arrives in Naples. Now, of course, Naples in the 17th century was under Spanish rule, so it really gave Artemisia unprecedented opportunities. She could seek patrons both within Naples and beyond. And she also worked on an unprecedented scale, as you can see by the pictures around me. It's from this time that her first altarpieces date from. We have to remember that until this point, none of Artemisia's paintings were on public display, neither in Florence nor in Rome. So she works on a large scale, and she also collaborates with other artists. It's clear she was very much accepted by the artistic community in Naples, something that can't be said of other foreign artists who'd visited the city before her. So in the case of the St. Januarius altarpiece, this is one of 12 altarpieces in a series for the Basilica at Pozzuoli. Artemisia saw herself working alongside established painters in Naples. And sometimes she even collaborated on a single work with other artists. This was a practice that was ubiquitous in Naples and elsewhere. And so she might work with a landscape painter or an architectural painter, as indeed in these two works. So Artemisia, except for going to London in the late 1630s, remained in Naples until the end of her life, but she really disliked it here. We know this from her letters. She wrote complaining bitterly of the sort of high cost of living, the poor quality of life, the violence, and we know that she dispatched pictures across Europe to try and seek employment elsewhere without success. But it was her sheer determination that really led to her success here, and she ran a thriving workshop in which her daughter Prudencia was almost certainly trained. And it is also from Naples that she makes some of her boldest declarations in her letters to a patron at the end of her life. And it's in these letters you really get a sense of Artemisia wanting to be considered on a par with other male artists. It's from here that she writes, "Your Lordship, with me you will not lose. I have the spirit of Caesar in the soul of a woman." So in Naples, she continued to paint well-known subjects from the Bible and ancient history, but she also expanded her repertoire to include allegories and also literary subjects. She worked for patrons and collectors both within Naples and beyond, and some of them extremely illustrious, like the King of Spain, for whom she painted this picture. This was one canvas that Artemisia contributed to a cycle for Philip IV, alongside Massimo Stanzione, one of the leading Neapolitan painters and a very important figure in Artemisia's life. And you can see her adapting her style because the picture has to fit with others within the cycle. And this is her very last known signed and dated work. It's again a Susanna, so I wanted the show to really essentially begin and end with the Susannas. And I think you can see just how far she's come and just how different her style is. The conception is completely different, but also in the handling of the picture. And this picture was only discovered in 2008. So again, it's the first time really it's being seen by an international public here in London. And it's very hard to imagine if both the picture we saw in the first room and this one were not signed and dated. Very hard to imagine that they're by the same artist. And it's often said of Artemisia that she's a bit of a chameleon, that her style changes. But I don't see that as a negative thing. I think it shows incredible business acumen. And I think it shows that Artemisia was adaptable. She could change her style according to the tastes and desires of her patrons in the different cities in which she worked. I felt it was fitting for the first exhibition dedicated to Artemisia in the UK to end with her time in London. We don't know when exactly she came to London, probably in 1638, and she stayed for almost 2 years. And it was at the invitation of the king, of Charles I, whose court painter at that time was Orazio, Artemisia's father. And we know that Charles had been trying to entice her to London for some time. He dispatched Artemisia's brothers twice to escort her from Naples back to London, and she was extremely reluctant. She even had sent a picture ahead of her arrival here. But when she did come to London, she was finally reunited with her father, who was at work on his last, most important commission in London, which was the ceiling canvases that were for the Queen's House, which are today at Marlborough House in St. James's. And it's even thought that Artemisia may have collaborated on those alongside her father, because Orazio died shortly after their completion. And in the Queen's House, Artemisia would have known this picture, which is by Orazio and was hanging there with works also by Artemisia. And in this final room, I was really keen to end the exhibition, rather as I'd begun it, with the father and daughter coming together. And although these two pictures are just a few years apart, I mean, you can see there's sort of superficial similarities between them. And this is, in fact, a picture of an Old Testament subject of Esther before the king Ahasuerus. And it was painted actually in Venice by Artemisia, but just a few years before this one. And I think, although they're both very theatrical in their settings and, you know, their narratives are basically built around two principal figures, the similarities really stop there, and you can see just how different the aims of these two artists are. And whereas we're completely dazzled by Orazio's painting technique, what Artemisia is really interested in is the human drama. So just throughout the whole exhibition, you see just how she puts herself in the shoes of her protagonists. And here, you really, really do feel the emotions of the figures in her painting. And you can see quite how different these two artists are. The only picture that is surely known and dateable to Artemisia's time in London is the self-portrait as the allegory of painting. And there's been a lot of discussion and debate as to how much Artemisia has represented herself, whether literally or figuratively, in this painting. But I think it's without question that it is self-referential. I mean, on a practical level, it would have been quite hard for Artemisia to paint herself in this position. She was also in her 40s by the time she painted this picture, but she definitely wanted to associate herself with this personification of painting. She places her initials beneath the painter's palette as if to sort of reference herself in the picture. But it is an allegory. And of course, Artemisia does something with this picture that no male artist could do, because by its very nature, the personification of painting is a female. And of course, Artemisia herself is a female artist. And so by associating herself with the image, you know, it's a unique and truly astonishing work. And I really wanted the exhibition to end on this. It's one of her greatest masterpieces. And it's what always calls to mind, for me, you know, what painting meant for Artemisia. It was this energetic, physical, purposeful act. It was not a contemplative thing. And it always calls to mind the words she wrote to her patron towards the end of her life, where she says, let me show you what a woman can do.
Thanks so much, Letizia. One of the opportunities we have with holding our Artemisia press conference online today is we're able to share with you some of the fantastic additional content we've been creating to share with you all on our website and social media channels. At the beginning of this year, we were lucky enough to film in Italy before Europe went into lockdown. We filmed in Rome, Florence and Naples, following in Artemisia's footsteps to create a 20-minute film that accompanies the exhibition. What you're about to see is an extract of that film, which will also be made available to the public on our website. It shows Elise Stevens, the wonderful actor who plays Artemisia in the theatre production It's True, It's True, It's True, visiting the Archivio di Stato in Rome to see the court transcripts from Artemisia's rape trial. I hope you'll agree that this is a moving moment that brings us closer to the life and character of Artemisia, who was just a teenager at the time. Let's play the clip.
Artemisia Gentileschi was one of the greatest storytellers of her time, famed for painting women of strength, passion, and vulnerability. 400 years ago, when women artists were not easily accepted, Artemisia broke the mould and broke free of the men who tried to control her. I've stepped into her shoes on stage hundreds of times, but to truly follow in her footsteps, I need to travel further, to her native Italy. Artemisia grew up in Rome. Her mother died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her father, Orazio, a painter.
Orazio was controlling, and Artemisia was rarely allowed outside of her house, so she spent much of her young life perfecting her craft.
Until, age 17, everything changed. Orazio Gentileschi, Artemisia's father, was asked to do a job with another painter, Agostino Tassi. And it was here, in the family home on Via della Croce, when Artemisia was working on a painting in her father's studio, that Agostino Tassi came to the house and he raped her.
The weather was wet, and I was painting when Agostino came by. And he grabbed the palette and the brushes that I was holding in my hand, and he threw them around the room. He brought a hand with a handkerchief up over my throat and over my mouth so that I could not scream.
Agostino was a criminal, okay, in any and whatever way. He did not pay anybody. He attacked every woman in addition to Artemisia. He was truly a terrible person. until his crime sort of caught up with him.
Her father, Orazio, insisted the case go to trial to repair the damage done to the family name. And it's all recorded in extraordinary detail here at Archivio di Stato, the state archives in Rome.
This is the volume of the trial, where Artemisia is telling about the rape. E gli sgraffignai il viso,
Okay.
e gli strappai i capelli.
So that is Artemisia saying that what she did to Agostino to try and stop him is she scratched his face, she pulled his hair.
The trial judge ordered that Artemisia be tortured to make sure she was telling the truth, and with Tassi standing right in front of her.
So she was tortured with the Sibile, and that was rope that went around the fingers and then was tightened?
Yes, and tightened. Yes,
Okay.
narrow.
And so that would mean that your fingers could break, right? Or
Yeah, sure. Because for a painter, it's very dangerous. And she's saying, yeah, è vero, è vero, è vero. It is true, it is true, it is true.
That's really hard. It's really hard to stomach.
Yeah. Alice, you are there. Inside. Huh?
Yeah.
You are Artemisia now.
I just feel really, I don't know, I feel really moved by it. I think,
You are there. You are there now.
yeah, I am there.
Thank you, Elise. That's a very moving passage of the film that you'll be able to watch very shortly. I'd like now to introduce our exhibition supporters, Google Arts and Culture. We have with us this morning Amit Sood, Director of the Cultural Institute at Google, and Luiselle Lamatz, our Head of Global Operations, who are going to introduce and demonstrate their online retrospective of Artemisia Gentileschi. So over to you, Amit and Luisella.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle, and thank you all for having us here. Obviously, before I get started, I have to say a very, very heartfelt thank you to the entire National Gallery team who's trusted us to be a digital partner in telling this story, because, for us at Google Arts and Culture, we've been supporting museums and digitizing collections since 2011, primarily as a source of giving people access to culture from anywhere. And I think, it goes without saying that the in-person experience is always going to be better. But I guess in times like this, a digital experience may have to do for some of us who may not be able to see the exhibition in person. With that, if we could move to the next slide, I just thought I'll introduce very briefly, we are a non-commercial group within the company at Google who's been supporting institutions. As I said, we work with over 2,000 museums, archives, and foundations around the world to essentially make arts and culture more accessible to anyone for free. And I think, one of the things I wanted to highlight here is also to acknowledge and thank the partners around the world who trusted us with digitizing Artemisia's amazing artworks. We have, if we could move to the next slide, as part of this initiative, we have some incredible experiences available online on the Google Arts and Culture platform. Of course, we have, the artworks digitized to resolutions that, are very difficult to experience in person if you might be, so inclined. These artworks come from institutions around the world. And of course, they have some amazing curatorial breadth to it with some great storytelling. For me personally, there have been two highlights of this initiative. One, obviously, being allowed and given permission to digitize the ceiling at Marlborough House over 2 days of overnight shooting. And I really want to thank all the operators and the members of the Royal Collection who gave us permission to do this and add another dimension to this amazing exhibition. And I want to end by saying that the FKA Twigs, perspective on some of Artemisia's works has also been absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much to the curator who's welcomed our participation, and everyone at the National Gallery. I'm going to hand over to Luisella, who's going to probably take you through some of the amazing content.
Thank you, Amit, and hello, everyone. Absolutely, we're gonna take a quick look at the amazing content shared online by our partners, and if we can move on to the next slide, we can find the experience that I'm gonna go through all online on Google Arts and Culture g.co/Artemisia. There is a lot more than we'll be able to show in just a couple of minutes, but let's get going with a little demo of this digital experience. We can start the demo. Right. I'd like to start the demo, and you can see at first sight the importance of how Artemisia work still inspires women today, and in particular, you'll be able to see this in the words of F.K. Twigs, as we said, singer-songwriter, got greatly inspired by Artemisia's work, and in fact, her favorite work has been digitized in super high definition, Judith and Holofernes, and thanks to the super high definitions done with Google Art Camera, we are able to zoom in and observe the finest level of details like never before, the finest brushstrokes. This helps us better understand obviously the style, the technique, and to really explore this like never before. The same digitization technique, the ultra high resolution, has been applied, as we said, to a very special place, the ceiling of Marlborough House. Here, curator Lucy Whittaker is kind of virtually taking us by the hand and helping us understand the incredible details that we can find in this work. Or we can explore it at our own pace. We can explore some of these incredible details. And one of my favorites is the very beautiful, incredible expression of the allegory of reason or strength, where you can zoom in and observe this, and these obviously will be very, very difficult in real life. And if you're interested in what goes behind the scenes to digitize these works, you can take a sneak peek at the operators at work that make these all possible with our partners. Digital exhibitions like these ones hopefully are opening up new conversations for educators, teachers, students, and anyone, anywhere that is interested in learning more, discussing, debating, exploring, for instance, the evolution of Artemisia's style, like we can see as we've seen the evolution of her self-portraits. Here we are exploring some of the most interesting details that hopefully will ignite digital conversations to learn more about her incredible heritage. There is a lot more in this digital project that I'd like you to explore. For instance, her background, her journeys, the relation with her family, and in particular with her father. You can also take a playful approach and explore some of these works in augmented reality and literally project them in your own space. And in fact, one of the favorite things for me has been lean back and explore these beautiful artworks, read the stories, and I would like to encourage you to do the same. Discover or rediscover Artemisia's heritage online, enjoy and share it. So on this note, I'll hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
So that's thank you to Amit and Louise Zeller. And now if I can invite Gabriele Letty back on screen, it's time for us to take some questions. And I'm going to start off with a question that's coming through us from Mark Brown from The Guardian, and it's for Gabriele. It says, can you talk a little on how important this exhibition is for the National Gallery and why?
Yes, of course. So it's the first major exhibition that the gallery is devoted to a woman historical painter. Artemisia is a figure of great importance, particularly in contemporary art history. She was largely forgotten after the 17th century, and she's really a discovery of art history in the 20th century. And I'd say in particular, she's been the discovery of certain women art historians. So I think she's very much in tune with our times. There's a huge interest amongst the public in Artemisia. And the acquisition in 2018 of the self-portrait as St. Catherine of Alexandria really gave us the opportunity to construct an exhibition and a program around her to make her better known, of course, but also to raise some of the questions that I think affect our time. You know, why were there so few famous women artists in history? How can we give them a new protagonism through the kinds of activities that we do here at the National Gallery? It's a very powerful show, And I think what comes across is Artemisia as a very remarkable historical figure, but one who also speaks to our time.
Thanks, Gabriele. And that sort of leads on to another question, which says, in an art history way, where do we go from here in rediscovering the other lost women of the Renaissance and Baroque periods?
So I think there's definitely a strong interest at the moment. If you look across Europe and America in particular, there are lots of exhibitions happening on women artists, some of whom are forgotten women artists and who are being rediscovered. Certainly in art history as a discipline, the role of historic women artists is being explored much more thoroughly. There is a sense that there's a debt to be paid, and there's a lot to learn and to discover historically, art historically. And certainly it's an opportunity also to reflect on the way our academic discipline has developed, and also the collecting in museums has developed. It is a remarkable thing that there are so few works by women artists in the National Gallery, for example. And I think we're in a strong position to say, well, look, here's a moment now to begin to take an interest. Let's look at this from a historical perspective. Let's look at this from an academic perspective, but let's do it as something that we can share and enjoy together with the public.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gabriele. And don't forget, if anybody's got any questions, just click on the link below this feed and to get your questions through to us. One for you now, Letty. You touched on this a little bit in your tour, but if you can expand on it. At what point in time did Artemisia become the sort of poster girl for independent women that she is today?
I think she was pretty determined throughout her life, but I'd say the situation she found herself in Rome after the trial, I think the sort of great misfortune of that episode in her life, she really transformed that into an opportunity. And the room in the exhibition, which looks at her work in Florence, where she moves to as soon as she's married, I've called it Becoming Artemisia in Florence, because I think it's this moment in her life, out of her father's studio, out of her father's shadow, that she absolutely starts forging her own path and her own career. But I think that determination to be seen, on a par with her male contemporaries was there right from the beginning. I think you get a sense of that through her letters as well, later on in her life.
Brilliant. And another question that sort of leads on from this. Have any of Artemisia's works ever been misidentified or confused with those of her father, or indeed of Caravaggio?
I think there's a lot of debate around the pictures sort of early on in her career. And I think that's really the problem there, is that her style, her painting style and technique is so close to that of her father. And that's because we have to remember everything she learned about painting, she learned from Orazio. She was not able to see artworks and meet other artists in the way that male apprentices were. So it's inevitable that her style is very, very closely aligned with that of her father. But what I try and show in this exhibition is that she distinguishes herself really in the way she interprets her stories. So even her first known signed and dated work, the Susanna in the very first room, which she paints when she's just 17, that picture is still believed by some to be by Orazio and merely has Artemisia's signature on it. It is a very sort of debated question, but I think her sort of feminine sensibility and her narrative definitely sets her apart.
If I could come in on that as well. She grows up in Rome in the 1590s and the early 1600s. It's a very, very exciting moment in Rome. Her father was friends with Caravaggio. It wasn't easy to be friends with Caravaggio, and normally those friendships kind of broke up after a while. But it's perfectly possible that Artemisia as a girl would have met Caravaggio. She'd certainly have known of his fame, and she would have seen some of his pictures, which were in churches, and she was able to go to some of the churches where his pictures could be seen. So Caravaggio, I think, is a significant kind of presence in her life. And remember that her father's art is completely transformed by the association with Caravaggio, and some of that, I think, was definitely transmitted to Artemisia. Perhaps above all, this very personal, very original approach to traditional subjects, and one which is extremely expressive, and one in which she wants to, in a sense, I'd say rather crudely, but sort of punch the viewer in the stomach. She really wants people to remember her pictures.
And that's brilliant because you've just answered the next question, which was, does Artemisia know Caravaggio personally? There's an addendum to that question, was how does her Judith relate to Caravaggio's Judith? Maybe one of you could talk to that.
I mean, I think, when you look at Artemisia's Judith beheading Holofernes, it's so violent. I mean, it's so visceral. And Caravaggio's painting of the same subject that was actually in a private collection in Rome when Artemisia was a young girl, so she may have known it at first hand, is equally violent. But I think the real difference between them is that Caravaggio's Judith is a sort of statuesque heroine who doesn't really show much emotion as she's sort of, doing this kind of brutal act. Whereas I think the extraordinary thing about Artemisia's painting is the truthfulness of it. It's the physical struggle, not only is Judith sort of struggling to do the task at hand, but in the original story, her maidservant is not in the tent. She's outside keeping watch, but Artemisia brings her inside. She's pinning down Holofernes, so that Judith can do what she has to do. And I think this sort of interpretation of the story is utterly unique. This idea that, what would it actually take for two women to overcome, a general of Holofernes' size? So I think there's a very clear distinction in the sheer kind of human drama and the understanding, the truthfulness of that episode.
There's also this sense in which, she wants to kind of turn up the volume from Caravaggio, which is a pretty astonishing thing to want to do. But certainly in the Judith and Holofernes, she does that. We're struck by the power of that picture in a way which I think Caravaggio doesn't quite achieve. So she goes a step further.
Brilliant. We've got a question now from Bernard Schultz in Berlin. He says, what is Artemisia's position in art history beyond her personal fate as a female painter in a male-dominated world, especially in comparison with her father Orazio, whose fame is now being obscured by that of his daughter?
I think she is taking her place in history. She had a very firm place in her own lifetime, but I think the fact that she was forgotten for a very long time, so was Caravaggio, so was Orazio. Caravaggio was only really rediscovered in the 20th century. And I think this has a lot to do with a sort of shift in taste. By the end of the 17th century, there's a definite kind of shift towards more classicizing way of painting, less the sort of harsh naturalistic approach. So with that, and sort of fashions changing, I think Caravaggio was largely forgotten. And of course, so were the artists sort of in his wake, and that included Orazio and Artemisia. I think with Artemisia's rediscovery, essentially by feminist art historians in the 1970s, there was initially a great deal of focus on her life, on the episode of her rape as a young woman. I think now, almost 50 years on, that there is a more sort of balanced approach at looking at Artemisia's life and art in tandem. And I don't think you can separate the two, I really don't. But that's sort of what I'm trying to do with this show, is really to bring a kind of clearer sense of Artemisia in the round. And I think in doing that, you can place her now in a sort of wider spectrum of the great Italian Baroque painters of the first half of the 17th century.
An interesting question here. Did Artemisia draw?
Well, yes, we know she drew, as did her father, but no sort of certain drawings exist. There's a very sort of compelling portrait of Artemisia in the exhibition by the French artist Simone Vouet, where she's standing in splendid clothes holding a painter's palette in one hand, but what she has in her right hand is actually a double-ended chalk holder, showing that she can draw, that she is a draftsman as well as a painter. And I think that's it's a clearly very artfully contrived portrait, but it's an interesting idea because it does show her as a draftsman. Artemisia, like her father, one of the traits they really sort of inherited, if you like, from Caravaggio was the idea of painting directly from live models. And we know that both of them did that, but they must have done drawings. And we know she certainly sort of traced elements of her compositions to replicate and adapt her paintings into, transform them in other related compositions. And again, this is something she learned from her father.
Excellent. Just got time to fit in a couple more. Here's an interesting one. Could there be more paintings by Artemisia to be discovered?
Absolutely. There are lots and lots. As there's a sort of renewed interest in Artemisia, of course, more and more pictures come to light and come on the market. And even in the last sort of year or two, significant new paintings have come to light. I mean, it wasn't the aim of the exhibition to include every work by Artemisia, so the exhibition is very selective. I've essentially chosen sort of a core of about 30, the best documented, dated works. But I really think this is just the beginning. There are so many pictures mentioned in inventories that are lost, and her time in London particularly. I mean, she was here for almost 2 years working for Charles I and Queen Henrietta Maria, and the only sort of sure picture that we have by her to date is the self-portrait as allegory of painting, but there are plenty others mentioned in inventories.
And probably the last one we're going to be able to fit into both of you. How has COVID and the health crisis changed this exhibition? She doesn't mean in terms of visitor numbers or social distancing, more in terms of how it might be viewed differently or how you've approached it differently.
Perhaps I'll kick off. This was going to be our spring show, and for reasons that we all know, we had to postpone the exhibition. It's been possible to do thanks to the commitment of gallery staff and in particular to our lenders. Now, if there's something that can be said about Artemisia, it's about overcoming difficult situations. It's through sheer willpower and talent and a desire to kind of make it in the world of her time. That we admire Artemisia for. And I think there's some element of that in the way we worked on the exhibition. We felt that we had to do this exhibition, if anything, as a kind of tribute to that resilience of Artemisia herself. And here we are, 7 months later, able to open it. And I hope that people will come and see the exhibition and use it as an opportunity, I think, also to sense that, we can get through the COVID crisis. I think, there's a lot for people personally as well in the example of Artemisia, somebody who kind of comes through very difficult circumstances and wants to achieve something, and through force of character, through sort of great personal moral strength, does achieve great things.
I would just add on a sort of personal note, if I may, just that I have put my heart and soul into this exhibition, and I've sort of lived with Artemisia now for 2 years, since sort of really working on the acquisition of the painting in the National Gallery, overseeing its conservation with Larry Keith, and then the picture went on this extraordinary tour around the UK to very unusual venues, to a school, a prison, a library. I mean, it's been a real journey, and I felt the exhibition was really sort of the pinnacle of that, and finally seeing the picture alongside other paintings by Artemisia for the very first time. I mean, it's been extremely thrilling for me, but also very emotional, I would say.
I know you feel. Sorry, it's almost 11 o'clock, so we're almost out of time. So thanks to Letty and Gabriele, and thanks to everyone for coming to our Artemisia press conference this morning, and a huge thanks to all our contributors. I'm really sorry if we did not get to your question. I know there were tons in there, but please do feel free to get in touch with the press office with any follow-up queries you have, and our email address will be on screen very shortly. We hope to see lots of you at our press view tomorrow, and if you've not yet booked your slot, then please do email us and we can make the necessary arrangements. And finally, to play out our event this morning, we have a very special world premiere for you. The newest episode in a series of 3 Art Zoom films we've made in collaboration with the musician FKA Twigs and Google Arts and Culture. In this episode, Twigs explores our own Artemisia masterpiece, Self-Portrait of St. Catherine of Alexandria.
Discovered in 2017, now exhibited at the National Gallery in London. Self-Portrait of St. Catherine of Alexandria was painted in 1615 to 1617 by one of the most gifted artists of the Italian Baroque period, Artemisia Gentileschi. She frequently used her own features in her paintings, representing herself as heroic women and brave saints. In doing this, Artemisia promoted herself through her art and empowered her heroines. Here she paints herself as St. Catherine of Alexandria, who was martyred around 305 in Egypt. She's identifiable by the broken wheel, studded with iron spikes, on which her hand is resting, It was used by the Emperor Maxentius to torture her, but when Catherine was tied to the rotating wheel, a miracle happened. It shattered. It's a powerful image, posing with the instrument that was supposed to kill you. It's like she's just about to say something really poignant to you, or it makes me wonder, what does this woman have to say? What has she been through? Why are her lips so pursed? Her body language to me is quite protective, her hand across her chest. Her arm acts as a block between herself and the viewer of the painting. She also holds the martyr's palm, a symbol of victory and eternal life, between her thumb and her forefinger, as if it were a paintbrush. Another symbol of St. Catherine's martyrdom is her halo. The crown she wears, topped with pearls, is an allusion to her royal status, and the way her hand is brought gracefully to her chest is also typical of the way the saint is represented. She also gives the saint a real physical, almost sculptural presence. The three-dimensionality of the painting is arresting. Look at the glint of the highlight on the metal spike and its shadow, or the protruding bones on her right hand. Have you spotted the tiny patch of yellow drapery, catching some light in the dark? But the most striking element might be her pure white sleeve, almost resting on the edge of the frame, and which seems to be coming forward. Women have always suffered at the hand of the patriarchy, and the fact that in the story of St. Catherine, when she was put to death, the wheel was broken and she lived as a sign of justice and almost as a sign of a higher power protecting her when she needed it the most. I think that also echoes to Artemisia's story, where she was raped and she went to trial and the man was found guilty of her rape, and in those days that was rare that a woman would be able to come forward and win a trial like that. So I think perhaps that's why Artemisia found some sort of correlation between her and St. Catherine, and why she decided to paint her self-portrait through the image of this amazing female historical figure.